The quiet, dimly lit hall, flooded with muted golden light, was slowly filled with the whisper of conversations and the clink of glasses. My cousin's wedding was over, and we, like the residual shadows of her euphoric radiance, scattered around the hall, each immersed in his own thoughts, conversations, random toasts. I, a 33-year-old man, a banker with a soul more reserved and accustomed to loneliness than to a close family circle, barely realized that my parents suddenly decided to join our company. They rarely took the initiative to engage in conversation with me, and even more so at such a solemn event. This came as a surprise to me. My parents and I are not on the best of terms, and each of us has long accepted the rules of this strange game of silent distancing. I knew that the real reason for our separation lay in their preference for my younger brother Jack. He had always been their ideal, that intangible star around which they, like planets, revolved, creating his world. Jack was 4 years younger than me, but his image, his carefree manner of confidently walking through life, his successes, which always seemed to his parents to be unblemished, all froze in their minds like in a crystal. They put him on a pedestal from an early age, and even years later their opinion remained unchanged, without being criticized or questioned. On the contrary, I was not like that. In my family, I've always been the one who went my own way, not really following family expectations. My dreams and aspirations were all the subject of neglect and skepticism on the part of my parents rather than pride and approval. My freedom and independence, the qualities that I valued most, were incomprehensible to them. When it came time to go to college, they coldly informed me that help in this matter was not in their plans, that I had to cope on my own. This day was the beginning of a new stage for me, a stage where, like a warrior, I gathered strength to prove that I could stand on my own feet. For a long time, we followed the rules of politeness, limiting ourselves to rare strained conversations at family gatherings. Jack and I didn't communicate at all anymore. We had nothing in common except memories, and I didn't try to revive them. My brother remained the eternal boy in our house, focused on his entertainment, virtual worlds, and evening drinking in the company of online friends. He lived with his parents, not thinking about building his own life or at least somehow getting out from under their wing. But that day, as if an unknown signal had sounded, my parents entered my space, violating the usual boundaries. At first I tried to pull away, but under my father's gaze it was difficult to do so. He started the conversation as if from afar, first with general phrases, then his question touched on my career. I answered briefly, avoiding details. I liked my job at the bank, and I recently got a promotion, but the details of the family circle did not concern me. My attempt to get out of this awkward circle proved futile. I had already taken half a step back, feeling the tension grow, but my father's voice, cold and commanding, seemed to chain me back. He ordered me to sit down, insisting that it was time for a frank family conversation. There was that special shade of anger and disappointment in his gaze that I had been used to seeing since childhood. But at that moment, he added something new, annoying and cutting to the heart. He hinted that I did not consider him a member of my family, which, according to him, was why I turned away from them so easily. This unexpected maneuver made me tense up internally. I saw how the relatives around us, some with a slight, some with barely noticeable discomfort, lowered their eyes, pretending that the conversation did not concern them. But I knew that each of them was hanging on every word, even if they pretended to be completely absorbed in their phone screen. My father realized that he had attracted attention to himself and was not going to stop the attack, confidently continuing that, despite my achievements and decent income, I was unable to return to my parents even a small fraction of what they had invested in me. "We've spent our whole lives trying to give you a better future," he said, and there was a subtle hint of reproach in his voice. "But now that you've achieved success, you forget about it. We raised you, invested in your needs and desires, and now, when we get to the point where we could count on support, you turn your back on us. Selfishness is what I see, deaf indifference." His words made me feel hot, although outwardly I remained calm. I knew where he was going. This conversation, so sudden and so pointedly escalated, was carefully prepared. My parents saw me as a savior for my brother, an adult child who never grew up, remaining in his warm world created by their endless indulgence. Jack didn't know how to worry, couldn't be responsible for anything, and now they were trying to put all these burdens on me. I barely restrained myself from interrupting my father. My anger grew with every word he said. Obviously, my parents expected support from me, which they now planned to invest not in their future, but in Jack's whims. It hurt me to realize that for my brother's sake they were ready to undermine my peace, to knock out any remaining patience from me in order to continue to support his idle lifestyle, as if I were a debtor in their bank of family obligations. "You want me to make your commitment to Jack, don't you?" I finally said, as if challenging his hypocrisy. "I am a successful banker, but this is my achievement, my choice." I could no longer contain the anger that burst out, as if all these years of tension, resentment, and contempt had turned into poison that needed to be released. Coldly and abruptly, I reminded them how they laughed at me when I pleaded with them for support to pay for college tuition. It was a bitter scene, imprinted in my memory forever. They not only refused, but ridiculed me, as if my desire was a ridiculous whim, a stupid dream, unworthy of their attention. I saw their lips curl in a mocking smile, as they looked at each other, as if I had just told an inappropriate joke, as they said with utter seriousness that they had enough funds for only one child. And that child wasn't me. Every word I said exposed those old scars, turning them back into open wounds. I made it clear that for them I was nothing more than a joke, a minor character, necessary only as a kind of addition to the brilliant image of their beloved son. But here's the irony of fate. Now, when their golden boy turned out to be unable to feed himself, they suddenly remembered the existence of their eldest son, successful and independent. Their request for help was not a sincere confession or a show of care, but just a convenient excuse to provide financial support for their child, who was still immersed in his infantile desires. My words were sharp, and I knew they would hurt them, but finally I poured out all that I had been saving up for so long. I reminded them that their support in me was minimal, only within the framework of the law, and that I was well aware that everything they did for me was not a gesture of goodwill, but a simple fulfillment of parental duty. If I hadn't been their son by blood and law, they probably wouldn't have done that either. And now, when I see them begging me for support, which they need not at all for their quiet old age, but for the support of their brother, I clearly see the whole picture. For them I was just a means, a tool to ensure the comfort of their real star, their Jack. But as soon as I said all this, I felt a sharp tension rise in my chest, flooding my face with heat. I could barely maintain a semblance of calm, but still, feeling my eyes begin to shine treacherously, I left the table with all my might. The toilet became my refuge, a place where I could, at least for a moment, allow myself this outburst of pain and anger. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me weak, broken. When I returned, the hall was noticeably empty. Everyone who heard our conversation dispersed, and although the wedding was still going on around, our corner was plunged into silence. I didn't want to stay there a minute longer, and without saying goodbye to anyone, I left and drove home. I tried to suppress these thoughts, not letting resentment get the better of me. But it turned out to be more difficult than I expected. A few days later, my phone suddenly came to life. It was Jack. The call from him was unexpected, but what he said struck me even more. It turned out that the story of our quarrel quickly flew around the relatives like a leaflet in the wind. My father and mother, under the pretext of my education, once borrowed money from several of our loved ones, assuring them that they would go to study for me and for Jack. When I realized the full scale of what was happening, I was seized with a strange feeling of liberation, as if the long-term burden that I had been carrying in silence suddenly began to turn into strength. Jack, of course, was sure that, even after all that had been said, would eventually give up everything and save our family from the consequences of their own actions. His request was not just absurd, it echoed bitterly all those situations when I remained in the shadow of their favor for him, their immense desire to create the illusion of perfect but false family harmony. It suddenly became clear to me how deep they had gone into this deception. What was once a simple lie for the sake of convenience, the debt that my parents took from relatives under the pretext of my education, has now grown into a maze of lies that has become an integral part of their lives. But now that the truth has come out, they are faced with consequences that they apparently did not expect. 3 of our relatives, each of whom was misled with deceptive confidence, filed a lawsuit demanding the return of their funds. Paradoxically, my parents did everything to support my brother's fantastic lifestyle, neglecting duty and honor, and all this so that Jack could afford his empty existence filled with clubs, fashionable gadgets, and eternal entertainment. Jack, upon learning about the lawsuits, did not hesitate to call me and beg for one thing: to support the lie. He wanted me to convince these people that everything I said at the wedding was just a theatrical act, an attempt to hide my shame in front of my family. I was needed to dissuade them from the lawsuit, which, according to him, could destroy our family. He believed that I would finally go along with them in order to save them and return the status quo. His confidence in this even amused me. He didn't really seem to think that I could refuse. However, this time I decided not to give in. Instead, I said that if they wanted to survive in this maze of lies, they would have to get out of it on their own. My position was firm. I knew it wasn't me who put them in this situation. They created it themselves, step by step, year after year. Their dependence on illusions, their inability to accept the truth, all this led them down a path where the only help for them would be their own understanding and awareness of mistakes. After that call, I didn't just refuse their request, I took the next step. I decided to block my brother and break the connection in order to avoid further manipulation and attempts to extract any more concessions from me. And now that I finally have the opportunity to tell my side of the story, I've done it. I published it so that everyone could see the truth and evaluate how my parents allocated their resources and how they handled their obligations to relatives. I was sure that sooner or later they would try to expose themselves as victims of circumstances in order to preserve the remnants of their reputation and try to deceive support and sympathy. But my story, my truth, was already in the field of view of others, and I felt that I had made the right move. Not for revenge, but for justice, so that no one else gets caught in the net of their manipulations. I can't put into words the feeling of bewilderment and bitterness that overwhelmed me when I realized that my brother was really ready to use every trick to make me lie in order to save our parents. My refusal, my determination to be honest, they perceived all this as another barrier that could be destroyed with the help of manipulation and moral pressure. They clearly believed that they could awaken a sense of guilt in me, persuade me to lie, confident that my duty was once again to put their interests above my principles. And even now, when I was writing this article, deep down I still had a doubt: had I become too cruel? But the flood of supportive responses confirmed that I am not alone in my thoughts. This support gave me confidence, helped me maintain my common sense and firmness, which seemed to be a little shaky. Your words have become an anchor for me, a reminder that the truth is something that should not be hidden, no matter how cruel it may be for those who are used to living in a world of lies and self-deception. Some of you have asked questions in the comments to better understand my history and family ties. One of the most frequent questions was about my relationship with those relatives from whom my parents borrowed money. Unfortunately, I must admit that I am not familiar with them personally. I have never met these people, although, of course, they deserve sincere respect for the kindness they have shown. Perhaps they agreed to help my parents simply because they believed in the honesty and decency of our family. They were incredibly responsive people, such that sometimes it is even surprising how they could entrust their money without suspecting how wrong their choice was. I don't think it's right to turn to them now when their faith and good intentions is at stake. All I hope for is that they have some kind of documentary evidence of the loan, papers that could prove them right if the case goes to court. Another popular question was about my grandparents. I've never had much intimacy with them. My mother's parents passed away a long time ago. I barely remember them, and my father's parents are alive, but I always had a distance with them. Perhaps even they believed that my brother was the best in the family, worthy of attention and pride. And although I once dreamed that they could become my support, now they have become almost strangers. It is sad to realize that I had no relatives who would have supported me during those difficult years. My own achievements are the result of my hard work and perseverance. When it came time to pay for college, I had to work part-time, balance between classes and work to pay the bills, and in some cases, when the situation became very difficult, I turned to friends. Some of them and their parents offered me a little help, which I then, having already got back on my feet, fully returned. It was probably the purest act of kindness I've ever experienced. But parents and family? No, they did not support me in my aspirations, and, probably, this became for me the very lesson that hardened me and taught me to go my own way. Today, looking back, I feel not bitterness, but pride for the path that I have traveled. I did everything myself and didn't depend on anyone. I have no regrets about not accepting help, because by doing everything on my own, I became who I am. 2 weeks have passed since my first message, and during this time the situation has only been gaining momentum. My parents seem to be in real trouble now. My relatives, the same kind souls who once lent them money, have actually sued. Shortly after I made my story public, they found evidence of loans, which, according to my friends, were written promises on paper to repay the amounts within a certain period of time. Now my parents are facing serious legal consequences, and this, it would seem, should have been their top priority. But instead of focusing on their defense, they tried to persuade me to save them again. A few days ago, they arrived at my house, accompanied by my brother, confident that they could break me for the last time. I felt from the very beginning that this could be an attempt at intimidation or manipulation, something equally absurd and undignified. I reluctantly opened the door for them after persistent knocks for several minutes. My brother, with all his feigned friendliness, and my father, with feigned seriousness, entered my apartment, creating an oppressive atmosphere of tension. The father spoke first, and his words cut like knives, exposing the depth of their despair. He demanded that I lie to save them, for the sake of their peace of mind and reputation, which were now under threat. They needed me to take the blame, claiming that I had made up the story of their debts to make them look bad. My father insisted that the most important thing for them now was to buy time to delay the payment of money that they could not afford to return immediately. It's ironic that after so many years of silence and disregard for me, they suddenly started talking about the importance of family. Family. This word, which I used to perceive with warmth, now sounded from their lips like a cold, unnecessarily cynical attempt to soften me, to make me remember my former affection. But what kind of family is this, in which some expect others to betray themselves for the sake of profit? Where is a family that is being manipulated and blackmailed to save its own face? I took on all the firmness I could muster and looked at them. The words that followed, I did not expect to hear from myself, but they were necessary, like medicine for an old wound. I told them bluntly that I no longer consider them my family. Those who are ready to manipulate, coerce, and appeal to a sense of duty only when it is beneficial to them cannot claim the title of family. And the more they continue to insist on this, the deeper our gap will be. My father tried to object, his face flushed with anger, as if my statement burned him. He continued, trying to arouse a sense of guilt, but I only reminded him that it was all the result of their own decisions. I already knew what these people were capable of, and their tricks had long ceased to work on me. Stymied when attempts to manipulate my emotions failed, my brother turned to threats. He tried to assure me that he would publish rumors discrediting me, that he would be able to get to my superiors and force them to fire me if I did not agree to comply with his demands. I saw in his eyes how he believed in the power of his words, how he hoped that I would be afraid for my reputation and career. These weak threats were ridiculous. I coldly informed him that if he even tried to make public the lies about me, he would have another lawsuit in his collection of problems, a libel suit. Please let him try if he wants to see how deep this hole is, which he seems to want to fall into with our parents. As soon as I said that, my mother flushed, her eyes burning with rage. She pointed out that I had no right to bother my brother, especially after everything I had done to our family. These words, each one of them, hit like a stone. The words that I had somehow destroyed our family sounded ridiculous, but they made me feel uncomfortable. I did nothing to put them in this position. It was their decisions, their lies, and their debts, taken for the sake of preserving the image and so that their golden child could continue to live without caring about anything. They chose the path of lies and deception, and they themselves became entangled in their web. I was nothing more than an observer in this game until they decided to frame me to save their own face. Neither I asked them to take money from the family, nor I came up with absurd excuses not to repay the debt. And it's certainly not my fault that my brother grew up to be an infantile, unable to take on any responsibility as an adult child. All these are their choices, their decisions. If they want to pat themselves on the back for investing their love and money in raising a man who can't take care of himself, then let them do it somewhere else and without me. I told them all this calmly, looking into their eyes. Then I firmly asked them to leave my house. It was my day off, and I really had more constructive and pleasant plans for the day than listening to their stupid attempts to intimidate or soften me. My brother ran out first, apparently hoping to leave behind a spectacular warning. He said that I would not get away with it so easily, and that he would definitely sort it out with me. It seemed both funny and pathetic to me. I could hardly help laughing, imagining how he was going to deal with me, except with his game controller or with the help of an army of 20-year-old online gaming friends. Apparently, he seriously hoped that his virtual companions would support him and intimidate me in cyberspace, as if this could make any impression on me. Instead of answering, I just told him, "Brush your teeth more often if you're going to approach people and try to intimidate someone." My brother blushed, his face resembled an overripe tomato, and, barely restraining himself, he almost attacked me. His mother, alarmed by his sudden impulse, hastily pulled him away, and at that moment I felt a strange, almost quiet satisfaction in myself. Their attempts to intimidate and humiliate me seemed to be in the past. Now they were in a position where every step they took only caused growing despair. I understood that their situation was getting worse, that they were now completely helpless, just as I once was, begging them to support my college dreams, and they just laughed. Now, only barely concealed panic remained on their faces. It's been a few weeks since they came to see me, and from what I've heard from friends and relatives, they weren't doing well. I found out that parents are now not shy about telling everyone they meet about their troubles, how they are barely making ends meet, trying to find the means to pay for the services of a lawyer and the debts that are hanging over them. Of course, they call this moment inappropriate for them, as if it could ever have been convenient at all. They complain about their future financial difficulties, because retirement is already on the horizon and solutions have not come. The irony was that the easy way out lay right in front of them. It was enough just to get the youngest son to find a real job and finally contribute to the family. But they also showed themselves predictably here. They would prefer to continue to indulge their golden child, to allow him to continue his senseless entertainment, instead of him finally taking responsibility. I couldn't even imagine them taking a step towards helping him grow into a really mature person. His spoiled nature is completely rotten from constant concessions and indulgences, and now they have to pay the price for this choice. Meanwhile, they started a new rumor. My parents, in their tireless attempt to somehow whitewash themselves, told me that I was tormented by remorse, that I allegedly offered to pay for a lawyer, but they, offended by my act at the wedding, proudly refused my help. It turned out that they were spreading this lie so persistently that several of our relatives even believed it and contacted me, surprised, but at the same time touched by my noble act. Over and over again, I had to explain to each of them that this was just another lie. Not only would my parents not refuse my help, but they literally begged for it, resorting to any tricks and manipulations. Their desire to hide their mistakes and shift the blame onto me made them grab at any means to save face, even if it required going down the path of shameless deception. I assured each of them that I had never had the desire or intention to help people who sacrificed honesty for the dubious privilege of creating an illusory world for a younger brother. I felt something in me let go with each conversation, as the past, like a spider's web, faintly and almost imperceptibly fades into the shadows. All my relatives, in turn, came to me with questions, not hiding their surprise. Each of them had heard some version from my parents and believed it to be true until I explained that everything they had been told was a complete lie. I told them the truth, telling them how my parents and brother desperately begged me to retract my words in order to give them a chance to hide from the consequences of their actions. They asked me to play along, hush up the whole story, and then my brother even tried to resort to threats, although his ridiculous attempts to intimidate me looked almost comical. When I explained this to my relatives, I did not have to convince them for a long time. My story turned out to be much more logical for them than the pathetic attempts of my parents to justify themselves. It has always been amazing to me how my parents managed to hide behind a facade of virtue while being gripped by fear for their reputation. Even now, when lawsuits awaited them, when they faced the most real risk of losing all their funds, they continued to cling to false accusations against me, desperately trying to make me look like a family villain. It became their priority, their own survival strategy. It was as if they had forgotten that the truth was no longer on their side, and none of their relatives believed them anymore. Recently, with bitterness and an almost childish sense of schadenfreude, I learned that my parents had lost all 3 lawsuits filed against them. They were ordered to repay the money they owed, and they had to pay off the entire debt within a few months. My relatives brought the news, and I couldn't hide my satisfaction. Finally, justice prevailed, and the consequences they had so feared became reality. Instead of admitting their responsibility, my parents found someone to blame, me. As soon as the verdict was handed down, they immediately began to complain to everyone who listened to them that it was I who ruined them and deprived them of stability in retirement. Their favorite story turned into a rattling mix of self-justification and accusations against me, and even now they seemed unable to realize that it was their own actions that led to this result. These endless excuses seemed to me something akin to mental acrobatics. They made titanic efforts to make me look guilty for their troubles, so that everyone who knew them would get the impression that I had destroyed their world. I couldn't help but smile, because in fact they were the ones who laid out their house brick by brick, never realizing that salvation could only come through admitting their own mistakes. The irony of this situation was that even by elevating their youngest son, even by indulging his narcissistic weaknesses, they still made me the central figure of all their stories. It seemed more important for them to find an enemy in my face, on whom they could focus their resentment, their hatred, and their frustrations. It was as if I was the shadow that they believed deprived them of light. They didn't realize that to the people around them, it all looked just pathetic. No one felt sorry for them, no one expressed sympathy for their imaginary suffering, because everyone saw in this story an attempt to gain attention at the expense of someone else's lies and manipulations. My parents, blinded by their resentment and wounded self-esteem, continued to strive for the center of attention, not realizing that they were drawn there not by honor at all, but by contempt. The news that I'm going to tell you has really captured me completely, and I hope that it will cause you as much joy as it does me. This time, the stars came together in such a way that, finally, the day came that I had been waiting for almost all my adult life. My brother was forced to go to work. Yes, my spoiled younger brother, who is used to having the whole world revolve around his desires, whom his parents protected from the slightest worries and responsibilities, is now forced to look for a job and earn a living. When I found out about it, I felt like I was on top of the world, as if the universe had finally done its little act of justice. All my youth, I saw him loafing, living off his parents, while I had to work as a cashier at a cheap diner to pay for my studies. Now imagine my amazement when I heard that my brother, this king of home video games, had to get a job as a cashier in a video game store. What an exquisite twist of fate. It can be said that revenge is best served cold, and I felt this cold with all my depth. As soon as I found out about this, a triumphant feeling flared up in my heart, and I couldn't resist. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I dropped everything, even refused lunch, and went to work with him. I walked into the store, slowly looking around, and finally saw him at the checkout, tense and unhappy, with that expression on his face that says more clearly than words, "How did I end up here?" When our eyes met, I felt that little spark of triumph that made me take a few steps forward. I approached him like a random customer, pretending that I had just come to look, and he clearly noticed me. His face was a mixture of irritation and embarrassment. Holding back my inner laughter, I asked him how he was doing, and even sarcastically asked if our parents had cried on his first day at work the same way they had on his first day at school. His irritation reached the limit. He abruptly told me to leave, but I couldn't hide my joy. It was a small scene, but it was infinitely sweet for me. When I left the store, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It may be a petty feeling, but I couldn't deny myself the pleasure of seeing life finally show him that the world beyond parental protection is not as simple as virtual games. The memories of those days when my brother and I were inseparable still cause me warm sadness. We argued about everything, about music, about favorite movies, about whose turn it was to choose where to go for the weekend, and even about which of us would be the first to rent our parents for evening trips. We could make each other cry, but that was always followed by reconciliation and the moment when it seemed that no quarrel could break our bond. I believed that our affection was indestructible, that it would stand up to any challenges. The irony is that now, looking back on it, I see how fragile our bond really was. It seemed as solid as steel, but now it looks like glass, ready to crack from one strong blow. This blow happened on the evening when my brother met his future wife Lillian. We were at the bar, both young, carefree, with friends, each in his own circle. Lillian went there with a group of friends, and my brother and I went there with our school friends. Their eyes met, and something in that look changed everything. My brother, who is usually not one of those who takes the first step, approached her, and I watched in amazement as they began to talk, as if no one else existed. They had that rare, almost fabulous chemistry that ignites immediately like a spark, leaving no doubt that someone special is in front of you. But it wasn't the only meeting that night that predetermined the changes in our lives. Lillian's friend Jeremy was in the company, quiet and a little withdrawn, just like me that evening. While my brother and Lillian were talking, forgetting about everything, Jeremy and I also started talking, as if we had accidentally formed our own little couple. This conversation dragged on, and suddenly I realized that I had found a kindred spirit in him. Our relationship developed slowly, at a calm pace, unlike the stormy love that was rapidly flaring up between my brother and Lillian. So, all four of us became friends. For years have passed, and I have seen the bond between my brother and Lillian grow stronger, until one day he announced that he had proposed to her. Lillian agreed, and for everyone it became an event that they decided to celebrate properly. My brother and Lillian organized an engagement party, renting a large, luxurious house and inviting there, it seemed, everyone we had ever known, friends from school, from college, even those whom we had not seen for many years. It was an evening full of excitement and secular smiles. I seemed to be part of a single rhythm that seemed perfect, until I realized that it was just an illusion. The engagement party was like an explosion from the past, a return to the wild, reckless atmosphere of the student years. There were so many familiar faces, bright lights and glasses around that I seemed to be back in the days of our university. I enthusiastically prepared a gift for my brother and Lillian and came to the party with Jeremy. We were having fun and spinning to the rhythm of the music. Everyone seemed carefree and happy, and I really believed that it would be an unforgettable evening. The noise of the crowd and drunken laughter gradually scattered us through different rooms of the huge rented house. At some point, I noticed that I had lost sight of all three of them, my brother, Lillian, and Jeremy. Deciding that the evening would be more fun in the company of friends, I went in search of at least one of them. The house seemed endless, people scattered through the halls, where they whispered in secluded corners or loudly discussed life under twinkling garlands. And so, wandering through the corridors, I came across one of the rooms with the door ajar and heard Lillian's familiar voice. Feeling relieved that I had finally found her, I was about to reach out to enter, but immediately stopped when I heard my name spoken in a strange, mocking way. Taking a careful step back, I froze, listening. Lillian's voice, hoarse and mocking, said something about how fun it was to be with me and study with Jeremy at the same time. According to her, Jeremy seemed to be with me not out of sincere love, but just for fun, for a chance to jump over my gullibility. She spoke about it with such cruelty, as if it were an ordinary joke. The laughter of her friends accompanied her every comment, and I felt a chill sweep over me, as if icy air filled the room. And as if that wasn't enough, Lillian didn't stop. She continued to talk about how she had met other friends of my brother, listing them by name, and then moved on to ridicule, calling me stupid, blind, unable to see what was happening right in front of my eyes. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I had to take a few steps back so as not to give myself away and fly into this room, making a scene. After all, it was my brother's day, his happiness, and it wasn't for me to ruin his evening in front of all our friends and acquaintances. 2 days later, summoning all my resolve, I sat down across from Lillian to tell her everything I had heard that night. She listened to me with a face full of remorse and confusion. Her eyes filled with tears, she pressed her hand to her mouth, seemed broken. In a voice cracking with guilt, Lillian confessed that it all happened, stupidly, from drinking, that she understood how terrible she had done, and that she wanted to talk to my brother, confess everything to him and start working on their relationship. She even said they should go to a family counselor to save what was left. Naive and deceived, I believed her words, her tears, her every promise. But, as it soon turned out, I was waiting for another betrayal that I could not foresee. Lillian turned my life around in the blink of an eye, launching a whirlwind of lies and manipulations that I could barely breathe from. She accused me of creating fake evidence, claiming that I had fabricated screenshots and created an entire story to smear her. Lillian even managed to involve one of my brother's friends, with whom she was really close, in this lie. She made him act like I was cheating on Jeremy with him. That day, a terrible fight broke out between me, Lillian, my brother and Jeremy. I cried, begged them to listen to me, explained that all this was an insidious lie, that they believed lies. But no one moved. My brother and Jeremy, as one, stood by Lillian's side, accusing me of insanity and imagination. I saw Lillian holding Jeremy in her claws, but the pain I felt from my brother standing up to me too was unbearable. He even informed our family and friends that I allegedly made it all up, as if my cry for help was just a manifestation of my own weaknesses and distrust. Despair filled my heart, and soon I found myself in a bottomless pit of depression. My trust was trampled and smeared in mud, and my environment turned away from me. At the same time, I found out that I was pregnant with Jeremy's child. At first, overcome with despair, I tried to talk to him, offered to do a DNA test to confirm his paternity, but his response was so contemptuous and cold that the pain became even worse. Do you still dare to hope that the child is mine? With you? Even thinking about it is ridiculous. These words stabbed into my heart like a dagger. My brother, blinded by Lillian's lies, also refused to help me talk to Jeremy. I knew it was time for me to make a choice. Having no support from either Jeremy or my family, I decided to leave the child and raise him on my own. For 12 years, I was a mother and the only parent to my child, all alone and without a trace of the support that I once considered my right. I learned to accept and love my life again. Through long therapy sessions and finding inner support, I gradually healed. And so, out of the blue, I received a message from my brother, after a long, full 12 years. His address was short, agitated, and strange. He wrote that he would like to talk, that he had thought about it for a long time, that he had discussed this topic with his therapist. For a long time I couldn't make up my mind, but finally, after much thought, I gave him my number. When the phone rang and I picked it up, the first thing I heard was my brother sobbing. He cried and begged my forgiveness, uttering the words through ragged breathing. He should have listened to me then. He should have believed me, not Lillian. Lillian, as it turned out, is a liar whose lies have finally surfaced. She had ruined his life, leading him into a world of betrayal and deception, and now he was left with nothing, on the street, without support, with only the truth, which was too late. But it didn't touch me. I felt neither pity nor gloating, just a quiet, almost cold satisfaction. His devotion to Lillian, his unconditional trust in her, cost him everything. And while I would like to say that his apologies healed my wounds, the truth is that I felt only a calm satisfaction that justice had finally caught up with him, and he himself may have begun to understand the pain he put me through so many years ago. When he called me again, begging for a meeting, this time asking me to let him stay with me while he deals with the divorce, I couldn't help but laugh in his face. Hearing his plaintive tone, I was overwhelmed by a wave of memories, how once he blindly believed Lillian, how his betrayal left me alone. But now he was standing in front of me, lost, asking for help. His pleas did not move me. I told him to sit down, remember everything he had done to me, and think about his actions. Saying goodbye gratefully, I hung up the phone. After our conversation, my phone filled up with messages and missed calls. He did not let up, trying to explain everything, get at least partial forgiveness. I felt a little uneasy, and, hesitating between the old pain and sympathy, I turned to my new friends for advice. Their opinions were divided, but in the end I decided to give him a chance and agreed to meet him at a small local restaurant. When I saw him, my heart stopped strangely. The man sitting in front of me was not the confident, cheerful brother I knew. Now he was a sullen, exhausted man, as if he had been carried away into a world filled with disappointment and bitterness. I expected to see someone who weathered the storm, but he looked like the storm had swallowed him up a long time ago. We sat down, and he plucked up the courage to tell me his story. He only found out about Lillian's infidelities last year when he caught her with his own boss. At that time, he was already in a high position and, it would seem, achieved what many only dream of. But that wasn't enough for Lillian. Her thirst for luxury turned out to be insatiable. In the eyes of his boss, she saw everything that she once thought was attractive about my brother, and immediately began an affair with him, without even trying to hide it. When he decided to talk and confronted her, her reaction was almost theatrical. She exploded in rage and in revelation. With a cold smile she declared that everything she said about my betrayal was a lie. She never slept with Jeremy, as I suspected. She just wanted it, but when he rejected her, she retaliated by spreading rumors that ruined my life. When I heard that, I realized how deftly she was weaving a web of her intrigues. She revealed to him all her infidelities with his friends, to whom he had once been attached, and even with people whom he respected. It turned out to be a crushing blow for him, which left him no choice but to file for divorce. But Lillian, who had lived all these years as a housewife, was not going to leave without her benefits. Now she claimed a significant part of his assets. In the process, he lost all his friends who became involved in her intrigues, and could barely cope with his feelings. The family, in turn, was shocked and began to shun him, seeing how his marriage was collapsing and dragging all his achievements with it. His confession left me devastated. It's been 8 long months since my last message. After many sessions with a therapist and much internal reflection, I finally decided to meet with Jeremy. The therapist advised me to look for the end of the story, but warned me not to expect too much from the meeting. It was useful advice, and it was with this attitude that I entered the small coffee shop where we agreed to meet. It struck me how many years had passed, and it seemed as if time had stopped. He looked the same, only there was a certain sadness in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. We talked for hours, like two old friends who have not seen each other for many years and are now restoring a lost connection. At first they were simple memories and stories, then the conversation became deeper, and Jeremy did not hide the pain he felt when he learned the truth about how Lillian deftly manipulated both of us. When my brother joined us, I saw how his face, tired and haggard, reflected the same sorrow and regret. Each of us was a victim of Lillian's manipulations, and the realization brought us closer together, as if we were all standing on the ruins of the same ruined castle. During the conversation, Jeremy asked about my son with a timid smile. I showed him the photo, and at that moment his eyes filled with tears. There was a striking resemblance between them, so obvious that no DNA evidence was needed. But I knew that, despite everything that had happened, it would have been impossible to let him into our lives so easily. I explained to both him and my brother that this is not a process that can be forced. Both of them took my words with understanding, and I was pleased that this time they were really ready to respect my boundaries. Over time, I allowed Jeremy to see our son, but in the format of simple, casual meetings, like an old family friend. At these meetings, I observed how a touching connection was immediately established between them. Jeremy was trying to earn the child's trust, and it was funny and touching to see how quickly a friendship was formed between them. It was a slow, deliberate process, where every interaction reminded us all of the need for caution and patience. A few months later, we decided to do a DNA test, which confirmed the obvious. As a result, I allowed Jeremy to see our son more often, but continued to keep my distance, preferring not to rush into decisions. We agreed to maintain these casual meetings, to give them time to get to know each other, so that one day, perhaps, we could move on to more formal custody, when and if it would be right for all of us. In the end, I allowed my brother to meet my son, and their meeting was surprisingly warm. My son happily responded to the attention from new people who were genuinely interested in his life. He was surrounded by care that I was probably not used to, and a new spark of joy flared up in him. His brother, trying to make up for lost time and sincerely trying to prove himself in a new light, became an unexpectedly close person for him. Meanwhile, Lillian was trying to contact my brother again. As it turned out, her affair, which she so confidently told everyone around her, came to a natural end. Her new partner lost all interest in her after learning about her past and that she was no longer a carefree housewife, but had become a woman burdened with divorce and scandals. My brother, who finally broke free from her manipulations, cut her off with a decisive refusal. He made it clear to her that their shared history was in the past, and now there was no place in his life for a man who had brought so much pain and lies. For me, it became a kind of confirmation that karma really works. To see how fate leads people to the just consequences of their actions was almost a cinematic moment. I sat there, mentally imagining this scene with a bucket of popcorn in my hands, and realized that I could watch everything unfold without remorse. I let go of the pain, put those days in the past when everything seemed to be endless darkness, and I could only watch. Now that my life has finally found a balance, I don't hope for any miracles and just cherish the warmth that the three of us, me, my son and my brother, were able to create. I don't expect anything from this new relationship, but in my heart I hope that we will be able to maintain this fragile but warm bond. All morning I tried to ignore her habit of waking up late and making a fuss before work, but today it felt like a slap in the face to the calmness that I appreciate so much. I've long been used to the fact that on weekends I can afford to get some sleep, usually until 9 or 10 in the morning. Our house is a place of peace and order, at least that's how I always imagined it. We have no children and no other responsibilities that could disrupt this peace, and therefore on weekends I always hoped for morning rest. Today was just one of those days. However, instead of silence and rest, I was woken up by her usual feverish morning race when she realized that she was late again. Instead of calmly packing up, as people who are used to planning do, she jumped out of bed, poured herself a cup of tea, looked into the TikTok as if she had plenty of time left, and then began rushing around the house, frantically trying to catch up. Her flip-flops slapped loudly on her feet with every step, and it seemed that her every sound reverberated throughout the house. Her footsteps, the opening and closing of doors, the noise of climbing and descending stairs, all this was like thunder in the middle of a clear sky. At one point, she flew into the bedroom to use makeup, scattering brushes, perfume, hairspray, and anything else that came to hand on the table. There was a smell of perfume, hairspray was sprayed, and this was from the very woman who often asked me not to spray deodorant in the bedroom, because it was allegedly too loud and toxic. And so, as if all this wasn't enough, she took up a hair dryer to style her hair. My patience, which was already hanging by a thread, snapped, and I, barely restraining my irritation, told her, "Oh, so that's who's been so quiet here since morning." She didn't seem to take the hint. Her look was puzzled, and she even thought that I was exaggerating by calling her an inattentive person. Her answer only increased my irritation. "You're just an inattentive jerk," I said angrily, feeling the long, accumulated irritation burst out. She seemed startled by my words, but for me it was not just a morning misunderstanding, it was an incident that happened many times, touching the most peaceful time of my day. While I was thinking about it, I began to doubt, maybe I'm really exaggerating, maybe it's just a trifle. But after all, when this little thing repeats itself from time to time, it begins to destroy the balance, disrupt the order and respect for space that we create together. I understand that sometimes we humans find ourselves in a situation where rules developed from deep beliefs are confronted by those who do not understand them at all. It is as if, for some, inviolability and personal boundaries mean nothing, as if their significance were blurred in the noise of modern society's demands for the display of everything. I am a 24-year-old mother of a 3-month-old girl, and for me one of the most important values has become a sense of privacy and protection. My husband is 31 years old, and we made this decision together, not to post photos of my daughter on social networks. We wanted to protect her from excessive attention, from traces in the digital world, from her appearance becoming a part of something that she herself cannot choose. But recently, fate brought us to a situation that revealed many difficulties and caused deep thoughts about loved ones. A few weeks ago, my grandmother became seriously ill, and after her hospitalization, I asked my daughter-in-law, who is 35 years old, to help me and look after my daughter. I even paid her $500 for 3 days of help. However, on the second day after I left my daughter with her, my worst fears were realized. Looking Facebook, I saw a photo of my daughter posted by my daughter-in-law with the caption, "My niece's photo on Facebook, she's adorable." At that moment, I was seized with a chilling anger, as if someone had violated the sacred boundaries of my world. After dialing her number, I demanded that the photo be deleted immediately and informed her that I would never leave my daughter with her again. My daughter-in-law responded sarcastically, calling my rules stupid and accusing me of not loving my daughter if I didn't want to share her photo with the world. The dispute broke out instantly. She claimed that I was overreacting and finally made an offensive post on social media, telling everyone about our conflict and putting me in a bad light for forbidding posting photos. Some relatives turned out to be on her side, thinking that I was too strict about this issue. But my husband supported me. We took my daughter away, and since then we have cut off all contacts with my daughter-in-law, not intending to tolerate such antics anymore. My sister-in-law did not stop trying. She tore up our phones with endless messages, as if she did not understand that her actions affected something more than just my patience. It was an attempt to impose our understanding of family, our norms, trying to erase our boundaries and beliefs. The world of social media seems natural and harmless to many, but for me and my husband, this is a space where children should be protected, where they have the right to their own future, without the stamps and expectations that this digital world can impose on them.